Hey, we are here for another episode of the Artisans of Steel podcast. This is a podcast where I talk to some of the most talented and skilled and innovative knife makers in the world. I'm fortunate to be friends with many of them or loosely acquainted. And what's great about doing this podcast is an opportunity to get to know these makers better. Like we're doing today, we're talking to Jason Ellard, and I might be saying that wrong. I apologize if I am, Jason, and you can correct me later and bust my balls later. But anyways, I'm going to start off the podcast by just kind of going through our sponsors. These are the super sponsors through the Patreon. If you want to go to the Patreon, you join at the illuminated individual level or higher. You can be part of these live stream conversations, ask questions in the moment as the conversation is going. You can also submit questions beforehand and be part of the conversation, help drive the chat that we got going on here. So the sponsors this month are Ben Butcher of AMO Bladesmithing. That's AMO Bladesmithing. And then next we have Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Brewing, and he's on Instagram at Anchorage Brewing and at Anchorage Forge. Excuse me. Next up, we got Tony Sasma of TNT Forge at TNT Forge on Instagram. And then we have Mr. Brian Hinnenkamp of Tortuga Blade Works. I just realized I should bring the paper over so I'm not like looking off camera the whole time. Of Tortuga Blade Works on Instagram and Facebook. Then we have Mr. Eric Kidwell at District 202 LLC over on Instagram. We have Josh A. Weston on Instagram, as well as being part of the not the Josh. I almost said the Josh Forge Experience at Dragon Forge Experience on Instagram. And next up, we have Mr. Michael Poor, Red Dragon Forge on Instagram at Red Dragon Forge. Russell Tinsley is the owner of Ouzelfinch Beers, very tasty and crazy beers. He's on Instagram as at Ouzelfinch Beers, at Can't Make Knives, and at Nost, that's N-O-S-T, Brewing Project. And then we have Mr. Dan Hubbs. He is on Instagram and Facebook at 66 Mountain Knives. And then we also, finally, and last but not least, is Mr. Lawrence Lake of Maritime Knife Supply on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Maritime Knife Supply, and also online at maritimeknifesupply.com. Okay, today's conversation is going to be with Mr. Jason Ellard, or maybe it's Ellard. I don't know. He's going to tell me here in a second. When I first started following Jason, I think I found him through Instagram's discovery page, honestly. And I saw this kid, smashing down and forging some steel using a fly press. If people are not familiar with a fly press, Jason can get into it in more detail. But basically, it's a screw-actuated pressing process. And it is labor-intensive and hard work. And it's just amazing how tough you got to be. Or just trying to imagine how tough you got to be and how much energy you have to have. And it's good that he's young, because I couldn't imagine doing this at my age. To make his steel, to hot cut steel, forging hammers, forging blades. It's really incredible. And I look forward to getting to talk to him. He's a very talented young maker. I don't know actually how old Jason is these days, but he's doing really incredible work, and he's definitely worth a follow. He's on Instagram, Ellard Blacksmithing, Ellard Blacksmithing, and let's bring him in. Let's start this conversation up. Jason, hello, sir. How are you today?
How's it going? I'm fantastic. Thank you very much for having me on.
It's 9. So you're chatting with me from Tasmania. It's
Sure
9:00
am,
in the morning.
It's a bit cold, but we're ready to go.
Cold. All right. Are you an early bird? Tell me about that.
Look, I want to be, but I, it doesn't work out too great. Like I'll try and wake up at 6, but then it's just too cozy lying in bed. So sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, but I want to be.
How old are you?
I am 23 now. I just had my birthday early this month.
Right.
So yeah, 23.
And I think I've been following you probably for at least 4 or 5 years. So
yeah, it's been quite a while, hasn't it?
Yeah. time has flown. Actually, I wonder if it's actually been longer. And you can get into more about when you started. And maybe that's a good place to start. Honestly, I don't know very much about your background. We have messaged a bit back and forth online, but we've never actually sat and had a conversation. And I'm just like, how does a kid in Tasmania get into knife making? Where does he find his resources, his inspirations? Is it something you already had interest in, or were there other crafts that you did that kind of led to this? Like, how did you find knife making? How has this become your path?
Well, look, I've always been, um, I've always been in the workshop. My dad's a hobbyist woodworker, and he's got a couple wooden boats that he's restoring as well. So I've sort of
Oh wow,
always been around that sort of thing. Um, but I think it all really started in high school. Just watching YouTube, people, heating up metal and just smashing it with a hammer, and that just looked like a lot of fun to me. The knives were sort of a secondary thing. I just wanted to hit hot metal with a hammer. Um, but it all actually started when I was sort of getting, needed to get an anvil. They're very expensive. I made one at a train track,
sure.
and then I found a lovely anvil up the top of Tasmania. It was a 102 kilo Piterite, which is still my main
Oh
go-to
wow,
anvil. And then it's sort of funny because I then posted that railway anvil that I made for
yeah.
sale on a second-hand marketplace. It's an app called Gumtree. It's like a what's your version of a Craigslist? It's basically like
Oh
a
yeah.
Australian Craigslist.
Okay.
Um, so I put that up for like $20, got dozens of people messaging me asking
Hmm.
about it, and then that sort of turned into my first little business. For the next couple of years, I made 70 or 80 of those train track anvils, and I sold
Wow,
them all over Australia.
that's great.
Yeah, so originally my Instagram was Ellard Anvils rather than Ellard Blacksmithing, but then I transitioned after
Okay,
I I took a master class for hammer making at Everly Works in Sydney
sure.
with Matthew Mewburn.
Okay,
It's a beautiful big workshop with massive power hammers and all that sort of stuff.
right.
Um, so yeah, started off with the hammers, and then I was just building up my skills with the knives, and then it just slowly transitioned to the fancy chef knives that I like to do now.
Okay. So I was saying your name right. It's
Yes, you were.
Ellard.
Yeah.
Okay,
Look,
good.
I'm not too finicky with it. Like it's close enough.
There are better
It's
things
not
to
a big
worry
deal.
about.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great. So I love the hustle as a young kid. Have you always been kind of a go get 'em kind of kid like that? You're like, oh, I see an opportunity here. There's so many people interested in these little anvils, and I don't know how quick they were for you to make, but did you keep
They
slanging them
weren't
at
quick.
$20? Okay.
Well, like they started off cheap just because I had a spare anvil that I needed to get rid of.
Right.
And then I think I was like charging per 10 centimeter of railway, starting at like 30
Okay.
centimeter anvils. Um, but I'm gonna say that was not a fun process because that was just hours with a 9-inch angle grinder, cutting it up and grinding it to
Mm.
shape. And you know, I'm glad I did it, but I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore.
Well, were you carving out like a horn on them as well?
Yeah. So I'd cut the anvils to length.
Yep.
I got a local supplier of train tracks, so I never had to buy the stuff, which is
Oh,
mint.
nice.
But yeah, I'd cut the top angles for the horn, and I'd cut the web out underneath. I'd
Hmm.
shape it all nicely, flatten the top, and I'd make a nice crisp edge on one side and a rounded edge on the other.
Nice.
Good to go.
Yeah, I have a lot of people ask if that's an all right thing to start with, and I actually think they are. I
Look,
don't
that
have any experience with them, but I can imagine them, at least if that's what you got to work with. It's a decent place to start.
look, it works. It's more so to do with how it's mounted down. Like
Okay.
I've seen, I can't quite remember the name of the fellow on YouTube, but I've seen someone forging a pair of tongs on like I think it was maybe a 10 mil thick piece of steel that was like 2 inch by 2 inch, just bolted to a block of wood. So you don't need a massive piece of steel.
Oh wow.
The
Yeah.
train track, it works pretty well. It's not fantastic. Honestly, a much more effective way of doing it is putting it up on end and just forging on the top of it because you don't need a massive amount of surface area.
Sure.
As long as you got enough space, like as big a space as your hammer face, then
Sure.
that's all you really need. And when it's like that, all the weight is directly underneath where you're hitting, so it's a much more efficient way of doing it.
Right.
But they both work.
Yeah, I love that. So when you were in high school, it sounds like you spent time with your dad in the workshop and with rebuilding some of these boats. Have you always been super handy, or what were you like in what were some of your strengths, I guess, in high school? Was it writing? Was it mathematics? Was it crafting
Definitely
and
not
making
writing.
things? Was it
Um,
sports, like
yeah, look, I've always
theater?
been. I did do theatre. I
Okay.
don't think I was that great at it.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I've never been much of a history buff or a writing buff or anything like that. Maths has always been a thing that really clicks with my head.
Okay.
Um, and that's basically just maths and any metalworking or woodworking. I've always loved anything to do with making stuff with my hands.
Sure.
As long as I'm just not writing down a book, I'm fine.
That's fair. Yeah, I can relate to that. I was fine at math. I didn't really excel. Like I didn't get into calculus and trigonometry or anything like that. I think I got as far as algebra. But I always was good with my hands and taking things apart and putting them back together. In fact, this morning, before we're recording this podcast, I replaced the parking brake shoes on the truck. And I've never done that before. I saw like a quick 10-minute video on YouTube. I was like, all right, that looks pretty straightforward. And I did it and they work great now. So I'm
Hell
pumped
yeah.
about it.
I gotta say, replacing stuff in a car. I've got it's a Land Cruiser. It's called a 90 series
nice.
Prado. It's an Australian car. I think you guys have a couple 80 series over there in the US. I know Joe Rogan has one.
Sure.
He calls it is like a zombie apocalypse truck or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an old car, and I've had to replace a fair few things on it. But it's a fun process, learning how to replace all the stuff rather than just paying someone else to do it.
Yeah, I've actually been really hesitant about upgrading to a newer car because it can get very expensive once those things start to need work on them somewhat consistently. And my pickup truck is a Chevy Silverado, and I can excuse me, it's a 3/4 ton. I think I said 2002. Anyways, it's not super electronic or anything like that, so I can still take things apart, swap parts out, redo the brakes. I think the next thing on it, I need to replace the water pump, which I think really is just a disassembly job, and swap the part out and put a new one back on. But part of I like it because there's like this sense of self-sufficiency, and also like the auto shop wanted to charge me for 4 hours of work at $150 American an hour. And
Jesus,
then
that's steep.
Yeah, and then like the guy at the auto shop was like, here's the deal. The parts are not that expensive. It's like maybe $60 for the pair. But the work is going to be like around $500, maybe $600 after taxes. I'm like, what the fuck? And so I bought the parts. It took me about an hour and a half to do it, and which is hilarious. I'm like, what the hell were they going to be doing the rest of the time? And so, but whatever. I guess I get the self-sufficiency or the sense of self-sufficiency and kind of a fuck you to the auto mechanic because they wanted to basically screw me in a way. But anyways.
Yeah,
okay,
I don't blame for that.
Yeah. Let's go. Yeah, so I always have enjoyed owning older cars because I can afford to do the work myself really quick with a few hours on the weekend, rather than dropping, $600.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, and also I don't baby my car. I take it camping. I love taking it out bush, doing 4-wheel driving tracks and that sort of stuff. Sure. I don't want a big flashy, 2015 whatever, because there are a lot of scratches on that car. So
sure.
It's gonna be like it adds to the character. I don't want a shiny thing. Like I want an old rust bucket.
Sure. I'm the same way. I'm totally good with the rust bucket. The biggest problem is it is our only vehicle right now. And so whenever we go anywhere, wherever we go, we have this kind of like junker kind of truck that we're driving around. So I think that's going to be the next step for us is get a family car that's a little bit on the nicer side.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that it's maybe I don't know, I guess a little less embarrassing to drive around and be seen places in our rig rather than the work truck. Anyways, okay, so you started playing with what was your first introduction to steel again? What was that?
I think it was either one of my main projects in metalworking in year 10,
Okay.
or it was using my toilet forge in the backyard.
Tell me about the
Yeah.
toilet forge.
So, all right. So it was I dug a hole. I had a
Yes.
toilet bowl, put it down in there, and I used a hair dryer, I think, to shoot down through the top of it,
Okay.
to get airflow from underneath.
Yep.
I just used those barbecue briquettes. Terrible idea. You just
Oh
use
wow.
normal charcoal because they disappear in like 10 seconds.
Sure.
But yeah, that was back when. Oh, that must have actually been before. Yeah, that must have been before I did the train track anvils, because I remember then I was using a piece of I-beam as an anvil.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I think I was just mucking around with them with some railroad spikes or something like that, and just became addicted from that point. And that
Wow.
forge is now buried in the backyard because
Oh, you
obviously
just buried it.
it cracked and exploded because
You-
porcelain doesn't love heat.
Really? That's interesting. So I love that. So you're just like, I'm not cleaning that up. We're gonna bury
Basically, yeah. There's no
that.
just chuck some dirt on it. She'll be right.
I love it. And then you take classes at, you said Everly in
Yeah, yeah.
Sydney.
So
That
yeah,
that used to be the Sydney Steamworks, right? Where they would build and forge parts for trains.
yeah, spot on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a really big workshop. Sadly, they've had to, I think, lease half of it out to some coffee shops and all this random shit, which is a shame because it's a really big, beautiful place. I don't
Right.
like the idea of seeing a like cafe or anything in it. Um,
Except for
but
maybe if you're working there and you needed a coffee and need some
yeah,
food.
true. Yeah, saves having to run down the street and grab one. But
Yeah.
I did a 4-day masterclass, which is basically you make all the tools you need to make a hammer, like
Okay.
a drift, the hammer eye tongs, the eye punch, fullers, all that jazz, and then you use all those tools to make your hammer on the last day. So that
Okay.
was a 4-day long course, and that was brilliant. I loved every second of it.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a great time. I've never forged a hammer. I've always wanted to forge a hammer. I've only seen a hammer forged once, and that was by what was it, Cliff Dufton, CJ
Mm.
Dufton on Instagram, and he's obviously very talented. He does really great clean work.
He does some beautiful work. Yeah, his forging, like, oh, it's so good.
The
I can't get
cleanliness,
over how clean is. Yeah,
yeah,
it's beautiful.
it doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't. No.
So seeing him demonstrate that the one time, and then looking at other things and trying to work around like the shape of head that I want to forge, I think I have a plan of attack, but I don't have all the tools. I don't have a drift. I don't have hammer eye tongs. There's even like
Look, you
a
don't really need
oh, go ahead.
the hammer eye tongs.
Okay.
They're just nice to have, especially when you're putting fullering next to the eye with like the traditional rounding hammer style.
Okay.
It helps. It's handy to locate those top and bottom fullers at the exact same spot.
Okay.
But you don't really need them. The only tools you really need are a punch, a drift. That's it. Punch and a drift, and you can make a simple hammer.
Interesting. Okay. Well, maybe that feels a little bit more accessible. Because I see these guys working with all these different tools and all these different tongs and drifts
You really
and
don't need them. You
all that
don't.
stuff. Okay, well that's good to know. So the drift is the longer portion. So because the punch is just long enough to punch the eye, right? And then the drift
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
longer.
Punch is just a
Or,
punch is the short stubby bit because you don't want it to be too long, otherwise it's going to bend and
right.
that's not fun. But yeah, use the punch to create the hole and take out the plug because you never make a clean hole. You always take out a little plug of material,
Mm.
which is just the final bit of material that hasn't moved to the side. And then use the long drift, which usually some sort of tool steel. Like I make my hammers out of 1045.
Okay.
Usually I use 4140 for my drifts or H13.
Okay.
One of the two.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want a nice tough metal to make the drift out of because it gets very hot when it's inside the eye of the hammer, especially if you're doing forging work on the side of the cheeks, making them taller, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It can definitely deform your drift if you use something that isn't tough enough.
Right. And then when you're drifting the eye, or even probably even when you're punching the eye, I've seen people using some sort of like powder or like a wax or oil. I'm not quite sure what it is, but that helped kind
Yeah,
of
so
lubricate everything, right?
exactly. So you don't want it to get stuck in the eye because then it can mushroom inside of the eye and then you're never going to get that punch out.
Okay.
Same thing with the drift as well, that can happen, but it's not as necessary to lube up the drift as it is to lube up the punch
Okay.
because you can always hit it from the other side because it's an open hole at that point, so it's easier
Sure.
to get it unstuck. But what most people use is a combination of beeswax and charcoal powder, I'm pretty sure, or graphite.
Graphite. Interesting.
I just use pure graphite. I don't really bother with the beeswax. I always drop it and spill it everywhere. So I just use a little squirty
Okay.
bottle of pure graphite powder, and that works great for me.
I've seen that. Okay. That's good to know. I will
Mm.
I will try to remember that. And I actually, you sent me a bunch of pictures. One of them is some of the hammers that you forged out of some of your mosaic Damascus. I actually want to pull one up since we're talking about hammers right now, and just kind of go through some of these because I imagine you didn't start doing these style. Um, but what are the different style? It looks like I'm seeing a rounding hammer, a cross peen, a straight peen. Um,
Spot on. Yep. So that
okay,
was a big custom order that I had a few years ago. The different hammer styles that I've made, other than those three, um, I've done diagonal peens. They're not very fun. And then
okay,
doghead hammers as well, and possibly a smint of other ones that aren't really coming to my head. I've made some claw hammers and ball peens as well. The ball peens are quite fun
okay,
because it's a very similar process to the rounding hammers.
okay.
But
Except for
yeah,
you don't have to
those.
kind of flatten the face back out. You kind of intentionally let it bulge out.
Yeah, well, sometimes it doesn't go that way because, especially if I'm reducing the size of the ball peen compared to the size of the face, it'll mushroom
Mm.
out and fish lip, and then that's just extra material I got to grind away. So it's a bit of a pain sometimes, but you know, never going to say no to just hogging off some metal on the belt grinder because that's always fun.
Sure. I'm just noticing on the top of the hammers, where people usually put the wedge, you have Damascus on there. How does that work in? Is
So
that
if you
wedged in there?
notice, yeah, so
Oh,
if you notice, there is actually a wedge in there. So those two handles on the outside, they are fiddleback Tasmanian blackwood. The one in the
okay.
middle is hue and pine. With the hue and pine one, I used a blackwood wedge, and then with the fiddleback blackwood handles, I used a hue and pine wedge. So I drove those in to keep the handles set, and then I recessed a pocket to put in a Damascus inlay, which
I
it
got you.
might be. I think it's just a random pattern that I had left over. It might be something that I used in the build up of the pattern of the hammers, but I don't think
I'm
so.
seeing some sort of an explosion kind of pattern.
Yeah, something like that. I
Yeah,
think it might be a like a nickel explosion pattern of some sorts.
very cool. Um, how is it forging hammers out of Damascus that I would be really concerned, and I guess I don't know. It's the same concern if you're forging a blade, but for things to go sideways and get all fucked up.
Yeah, look, it's not majorly different to just forging one at a 1045. You just need to you can't do any cold forging because that
Mm,
risks delaminating. Um, the punch in the eye is the most stressful part because that's the most punch in the eye and forge in the cheeks. I'd say is the most stressful part because that's the most aggressive movement of material and the most likely place that it can delaminate. But as long as you're keeping it hot and not forging under, like an orange or red temperature, then
right.
it's not really any different to forging a normal hammer.
Interesting. And you're doing this work under your fly press.
Indeed, I am. Yep.
Yeah. Tell me about the fly press. How did you get started with that? Um, do you plan on moving on? You just gonna keep beating your body up with that thing, or like tell me about it. What's the
To be
relationship between you and that fly press?
yeah, to be honest, I've beaten up the fly press more than it has beaten up myself.
Nice.
Um, because the way that it works, as you explained a bit before, but it's there's a cast iron frame with a female thread, and it's got a male thread that runs down into it with a handle on the top and a big weight. So the weight just carries the inertia around when you swing it, and at the bottom of the screw is the ram, which you use to hold your tooling. And yeah, it's a really cool tool, and it's really, really versatile. I've used it for so many random jobs where I just need a nice, accurate application of pressure, and it's a perfect tool. Not so much for forging because it's not designed for it, so it's not the easiest way to do it. But I needed to make hammers because I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make hammers after my masterclass, and I knew I needed something that gave me an extra arm because I didn't have someone with a sledgehammer available all day every day. So I was tossing up between either a treadle hammer or a fly press. I was thinking of making myself a treadle hammer. A treadle hammer was basically it's a foot actuated like momentum hammer, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So you stand on a pedal, and when you push it down, it swings the hammer down.
Yep.
So you have both your hands free, and it's just your foot that is creating the hammer blows. But I found a lovely it's a number 8 AP Sydney fly press, which I think is about rated to about 9 or 10 tons. I'm not quite sure.
Oh wow.
But I found that in Sydney, and I had to get that. That was just a perfect press for me. Exactly what I needed. And it came with a stand and everything, a bunch of extra tooling. So I was like, why would I make a turtle hammer when I have this that I can get?
Sure.
So I got that. I got a loan from my dad. I managed to pay him back over time for it. And got that shipped over from Sydney. And it was a very big pain in the ass to get it mounted on the concrete legs that I put into the ground, because the thing weighs like 500 kilos.
Yikes.
So yeah, it was a big kerfuffle to get it there.
Right. It was interesting watching you. Like the first time I saw you forging, I was like, oh my god, that looks so hard on the body. But I actually noticed, like, the more I've watched you over time, and I love the videos that you post showing you use that. I imagine those get all kinds of views because you just don't really see people doing that, especially with the fly press.
You don't know.
It does seem like the Aussies have an affinity for the fly presses, because who is it? Jamie Bishop or somebody up there, somebody over in Australia has like 5 or 6 of those fucking things in their shop.
They're pretty common on the mainland. I know a fair few smiths that have them, but none of them use them as their dedicated forging tool.
Okay.
I've got my dog scratching at the door.
Oh, you're fine.
But sorry, what was your question again?
It was.
I had a brain fart.
No, you're good. I don't know if I actually asked the question. I guess what I was
the forging process of how I use it.
Yeah, because I was noticing the way that you're forging it is actually the amount of force that comes down is actually very similar to the way I use my hydraulic press. My hydraulic press is rated to like 25 tons, but the way I squish my metal is I'm just taking these little massaging bites. I'm never hamming down, just crushing. Ever.
See, you do that because it keeps the pattern that way. I do it because that's the only way I can do it.
Right.
I can't do those big squishes.
Do you think you would?
Yeah,
if you could?
Nah, because I think I'm not gonna lie, I do make some pretty cool patterns, and I can make them very even. And I think the main reason for that is because I'm using a fly press. I can't get big levels of distortion that I don't want, because I'm always having to take tiny little bites. And that helps a lot, keeping the whole pattern really even from the front of the billet to the back of the billet.
Right. I just want to also, you said the fly press weighed 1,500 kilos?
About 500.
500. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just gonna do a conversion. So in pounds, that's 1,100 pounds. Just for people who were curious. But yeah, I think like people see a fly press or they see a small hammer, like Julian Antunes. He does incredible work. He's down in South America.
Oh, his stuff is incredible.
Right. Yeah. And people are just like, oh my God, it's so fucking beautiful and it's so well controlled. And I can see.
And he's just got this tiny little tire hammer. It's like it's got a hammer of like 20 kilos.
It's exactly. It's like it's so small. And I was like, the control comes from the limitation of his tooling. I think most people be like, I want the biggest power, the biggest hammer, the biggest press, whatever, to like um expedite the process. But there's something that's lost through pushing it through so quickly. And I think
Yeah,
there are a lot of
100%.
people who don't get that, or don't take that in consideration or understand
Mm.
that there's a lot more control. The slower, sure, slower takes more time, but fuck, the control you get in your patterns by the time you're done is night and day versus just slamming things out. Now, obviously, you can still make interesting and great patterns just slamming things out on big hammers, but
You just
I
lose
don't
that
know.
consistency
Yeah,
through the pattern. Especially, I've seen people, using really fast forging presses, which I don't like because you can really easily take a bite too fast, and
sure.
forge it way too deep. They'll be taking nice easy bites, and then they'll accidentally take a really deep bite, and just that one deep bite can really screw up the whole consistency of the pattern because you have it really beautiful for the whole bar while you're forging, and there's just going to be this one spot that's just a bit crooked or a bit, a
Mhm.
bit off bias or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something I've done that. I am trying to do like the little massaging bites, but it's all hand control,
Mm.
and because I mean sometimes I'm working with stop blocks, but not usually until the very end when I'm trying to get the final size of the bar. And as I'm
Yeah.
reducing it down, I accidentally will too hard, and then I'm like, fuck, I know that's gonna be messed up later, and it does. I mean, it's sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's very obvious.
Mm.
But like the controllers that they have on, who is it, the coal iron presses that they
Yeah, I've
have
seen
now,
those.
they're fucking awesome because you can say, every pass you can just lower it down another eighth of an inch, so you can just do that amount of work every time, and you can just keep checking it down, and you have that control to massage, to build it out, to maintain consistency and control over the pattern throughout the length of that bar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I have mixed feelings about that idea because obviously
Okay.
it's very beneficial for creating stuff can more consistent, especially if you're doing production work.
Sure.
You want the same results every time, but I think it takes a bit away from the handmade side of it.
Okay.
In the same way that I don't love
Interesting.
using like a mill, for example, because it's
Okay.
your hands that are moving a handle that the machine is controlling. So it's not each to their own. A lot of people use mills, and a lot of people do
Sure.
some really cool stuff with them. But I find I find it to be a little bit less impressive than if someone is just doing it completely by hand with files and drills and that sort of stuff.
Right.
So it's a cool idea with the forging press, but I probably wouldn't use one
Sure.
just
And I
because.
can see where you're coming from because basically it requires less skill
Yeah,
to be able to operate something like that is a little bit not necessarily completely automatically driven, but
mm.
highly computerized, and everything kind of
And I feel
removes
like if
some of
I
that margin of error that comes
yeah
from the human interaction with the actual tool and accidentally fucking up and pressing too much and stuff like that.
yeah I feel like if I had one of those, I'd be overusing it, and then
Mm,
I'd lose the skill of just using a normal press. And then if I go to someone else's workshop and they don't have one of the computer controlled forging presses, then all the skills are going out the window, and you don't know what to do.
right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And so something else I wanted to bring up about the way you're using the fly press, I was kind of getting to it earlier, is especially as I've seen more and more videos, you're actually kind of thrown, like just before it's about to make contact, you let go, so your
Yeah.
body is like not in contact with it when it does make that impact into the
Mm.
steel, and then you catch it and you bring it back again. And I'm wondering, God, because you always have to kind of work with one dominant hand over another. Do you
Yeah.
have like a really strong right arm and a kind of a noodly
Oh,
left
I'm
arm?
I'm I'm a lefty, 100%.
Okay.
But so it depends on, so the handle, it sits on a hexagonal taper, so I can lift the handle up and turn it, one
Oh,
sixth of whatever, one sixth of 360. I can turn it 60 degrees. There we go.
60 degrees.
Quick
Yeah.
maths. Yeah, so I can, if the handle is behind the machine, I
Right.
can't be using the ball to swing because that's not that's not healthy on my shoulders. So I move it around, and I use different techniques depending on where the handle is in relation to me. If it's around the right side of the press, so when it's hitting the steel, it's like it's here rather than here.
Okay.
With here, I won't really let go of it, just because I don't need that bounce back. The reason
Right.
I do that is to allow the handle to naturally bounce back rather than me having to pull it.
Okay.
Um, and I feel like swinging it and just pulling it like crazy and use my whole body weight and then letting go. That is the power that just the weight of the handle can get out of the machine is a whole lot more than I can do just by forcing it. So it's all the
Right.
momentum and the
Oh,
speed that
interesting.
you get out of the ram. That's all
I
it is
got you.
because it's already got the weight there. I'm not going to be able to add much more weight to it by pulling because it's a lot of pressure.
Right.
But it's the speed that's the main thing.
I get
That
that. So
yeah.
I the way I'm thinking of, well, I guess you basically said it, but like, say this: the press, the dies are engaged with the steel, and then even though the steel's hot, you couldn't really yank on it, but by
No.
backing it up and throwing it, that momentum because of that weight, that will contribute more force
Yeah, so
to
it's
each
sort of
press.
like it's a mix between a power hammer and a hydraulic press in way in certain terms because
Sure.
depending on what I'm doing, like when I am punching an eye, for example, that doesn't take a lot of pressure because there's a very small surface area on the punch that is going through the hot metal.
Yeah.
I don't need to swing it. I can just walk around the press and pull it.
Oh wow. Okay.
So it's like things like that, and I use it for setting the wedges in my handles, in
Sure.
my hammer handles, and for that I just pull it. I don't need to swing it.
Right.
But for anything that I'm trying to get a lot of force out of, then I do need to use it in the terms of a power hammer rather than a hydraulic press. Just trying to get speed out of it to
Mm.
get the most power.
Um. You do a lot of really incredible, like I think they're actually very creative W's, or not W's, but I mean you are doing W's, but your explosion
Feather.
feathers,
There
yes.
we go.
And so I sorry, my brain was not working very well. Anyways, the feathers.
I had that moment before.
When you're cutting the feathers, um, are you doing that kind of pulling like you're drifting a hole, or is it more of like a force impacted kind of cut?
Yeah,
And
when I'm
yeah, go ahead.
cutting the feather, so I use that on the fly press. I'm putting there because it is just right over there.
It's right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I just pull because I don't need to do big swings. Also,
Mm,
that risks me moving it too much and going to the
sure.
side, and that's never fun, and it's
Right.
difficult to recorrect. Yeah, whenever I'm doing a feather cut, it's always a very slow process. Takes 3 or 4 heats, just because I don't want to rush it, and it's just
Yeah.
a very slow pull. So I'm not yanking it when I'm doing
Okay.
a process like that.
I have never cut a feather.
Yeah,
So
why? You've done so much mosaic, but you've never done a feather.
here's why. When I first started, it seemed like everybody was doing a feather. And I saw it demonstrated a couple times. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I get that, but I'm like, I don't know. It was just like, it never was super compelling to me because basically, like, at the most basic level, people are stacking straight layers up and they're cutting it in half, welding it
Yeah,
back
that
together.
doesn't interest me.
And I'm like, that's fucking basic. I'm
It really
sorry.
is.
Like, I'm not
Yeah.
interested in that. But then people were like, but it's a feather. It's so cool. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I could see
Yeah.
what you appreciate about it, but I do think there's virtue to the feather cut. It wasn't really until seeing Bill Burke's work and seeing what you're doing with feathers. And there's another gentleman. He doesn't do a lot of forging these days, but his name's John Emmerling. And it was your guys' stuff, you three. The first time when I was starting to see your guys' stuff, I was like, feathers are a little bit more interesting now.
I actually have a bit of a funny story about Bill Burke's Dragon's Breath pattern. So
Okay.
the first time I heard about that pattern was when I was at
You're good.
the Australian Knife Symposium at
Okay.
Thurrow Valley Forge, and I had someone doing. I was in I was watching a so basically this symposium, they have a bunch of 90-minute seminars covering a whole. It's over a weekend, and they have a bunch of 90-minute seminars going over various things like sharpening, guard fitting, tool making, all a whole bunch of different stuff.
Right.
And I was watching a mosaic Damascus seminar. I can't remember who. I think it was Keith Flutter. Actually, he was the guy who was
Okay.
teaching it, and he told us a story about Bill Burke's Dragon's Breath pattern, and that when Keith was at his workshop, the final process that he does in the pattern manipulation, he made Keith turn around so he can see what he was doing. And then when he turned back around after he had finished the pattern, he couldn't figure out what he had done. And I didn't actually know. I kind of forgot about that story.
Okay.
And then when I made my Dragon's Breath, I accidentally named it the same as his, and it is the exact same pattern down to a T. And I had no idea. And he sent me a message after I posted a photo of my knife to I think it was a Feather Damascus group on Facebook,
Sure.
asking if I got the billet from him. And then I took the conversation to the DMs, and he told me that no one had ever been able to recreate that pattern, and I did it accidentally without even noticing.
Nice.
So
I love that.
Yay for me.
Good job. No, you did it. Bill Burke had a hammer in several years ago. I think he calls it the Burke Mountain Hammer in or something like that these days. And he was standing with another knife maker named Gary House, who isn't really actively making Damascus anymore, and they were kind of putting pieces together. And I kind of was like, "Oh, what are you guys doing?" And he was just like stacking some pieces together, which is a conventional process that a lot of people see and do. And then I was like, at first he's like, "You can't look at this," and then but I think he realized like this is just a standard kind of, I don't know. I'm almost kind of scared to say what it was, but anyways, this is a standard pattern. So he's like, "No, I'm just teasing." And so I was just looking at it, and then it like flashed in my head, and I was like, "Oh, is that how you make your Dragon's Breath?" And he's like, "Don't you fucking tell anybody." And I just started laughing because it wasn't even feather cut. It was still like in mosaic tile, like pieces, and kind of they still had to be welded back together before then being cut and stacked to then be feather cut. And I was like, okay, I guess that's it. But it is a really beautiful pattern, and I want to pop up some of you have a bunch of photos you sent me, but I believe this one, come on, there we go. This has kind of this is your feather action.
Yeah.
And I like what you do at the tip. It looks like you're doing a tip weld.
I don't
Almost.
do. I do sometimes,
Okay.
but usually I always make the pattern come out right at the tip, at the center of the feather.
I love it.
That's a real crucial thing with me. But I think what I usually do is I'll rough forge the tip, and then I'll grind it mostly to shape, so I don't get a massive amount of pattern distortion right at the tip. But sometimes I do do a fish mouth weld to close off those ends. Yeah. And it's a nice little extra bit to the pattern.
Yeah, I'm just seeing how it's like it starts very kind of straight side to side, and then as it goes down the length, and I could see how that can just naturally happen because the way
it's
you're
just the sequential forging of bringing it to length.
Yeah, and you're doing that. You're also doing that on the majority of that, I'm sure, on the fly press, right?
Yeah,
at least the gross movement.
Yeah, I do 90% of all of my work on the fly press. Between I make all of my Damascus on the fly press. I do most of the rough forging of my knives on the fly press, and all of the hammer work I do as well as on the fly press.
Wow.
Plus a smitten of random other things.
Sure. Like setting wedges and handles and all that kind of action.
Yeah, it is such a perfect tool for setting wedges. I love it.
This one was a crazy one. This was a couple of years back, right?
Yeah, that one is nutty.
And when you watch this on YouTube, you can get a bigger image of this. And you could probably go to either his Instagram or his website and see a better picture. But there is so much going on in this. I'll let you describe it because there's a ton.
That the core
awesome.
it was a big pain in the ass to make that whole thing work. But
it.
the core pattern that runs down the core of it, it's a quadruple dragon's breath in a way.
Sure.
So it's a 4-way dragon's breath. And then I can't remember the exact. I think there is a name for the type of twist Damascus pattern that I use for the top and the bottom bars. I think it's called lattice, maybe. I'm not quite sure.
Lattice, okay.
But it's just a very fine ratio of 15N20 to 1084.
Yeah.
So it's very thick 1084, very thin 15N20. I think it's I can't really remember how I did it. I think it was built up in sort of just like a square grid pattern.
Yep. I can see it.
Then just twisted.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. The most difficult part was getting that tip weld. Because I had a bar on the top. So I had a preform with the core piece of the billet where I had a bolster forged in.
Okay.
Integral bolster forged in, and the blade was forged down thinner. I think it was still about 8 mil or so thick.
Okay.
And then I wrapped the 2 bars around the edge of it, around the top and around the bottom. And getting that tip to weld was such a pain in the ass. Because I could weld it from the heel, like from the bolster down to the tip, just doing light hammer blows.
Yeah.
But then there was like that. Imagine this point is where the core is, and then there's a piece coming down this way and a piece coming down this way. This tiny little section here, where all 3 pieces come together.
Right.
After I'd done a couple cycles couple welding cycles, trying to get it all stick, I looked at it and I could see light shining right through the hole. Yeah, so then I need to do something real quick. So I got a piece of scrap steel and I cut like a V into the bottom of it.
Okay.
So I could forge it on end.
Right.
To compress the tip back into the core of the steel.
Interesting.
And that worked great.
Yeah, that's a cool move. The first time, was that the first time you ever did a tip weld?
I think so. Yeah, I don't think I'd done one before that. Yeah. Oh, you can actually see. So that the Saya pin. That the Damascus Saya pin, that is the pattern that the outside bars were before I twisted it.
Right, I gotcha. Yeah, holy smokes. Yeah, the first time I did a tip weld, like a fish mouth tip weld, it was scary because.
Real quick side note.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So the inlay on the back and the spacer behind the integral bolster, that's stainless Damascus. And as far as I know, I'm the only person who has ever made stainless Damascus on a fly press.
Right. And
or like without a hydraulic press or without a power hammer, basically.
That's fucking incredible. I can't.
It's not easy. It's such a pain.
I've done just the scant amount of forging stainless Damascus, both Damasteel and making it, and holy shit, so much can go wrong so quickly. And
yeah, it's intense,
and it doesn't
really
move very nicely. It doesn't.
It is so difficult to forge. So that stainless Damascus, that was austenitic. So that was 304 and 316. So that wasn't hardenable stainless. Which didn't exactly make it any simpler.
Sure.
It just meant that I couldn't overheat it and make it crumble.
Right.
But still forging that, the preparation I had to get it all to weld.
Yeah.
That was a lot of work. But then forging it to shape was just ridiculous. It felt like I was forging a 10 kilo block of steel. It was that tough to move.
Wow.
It's just, I don't know why I did it. Just because I'm stubborn and I wanted to do it. But,
I mean, I think that's pretty fucking rad. Forging stainless on a fly press.
Yeah. And I did do performance stainless once with Nitro V and RWL34, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I went through about $1,200 of that through failed billets of overheating it. And then I managed to get one little paring knife about that long out of it.
I hope
at least I got something.
I hope you were able to get $1,200 for that thing.
I think I did get about that much. So.
Nice. Okay. You get some money back. It wasn't a complete loss. Did you learn?
I'm just glad that I did it.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah. Well, and that's the trickiest part about stainless, especially hardenable stainless, is you have a small window. It's easy to overheat, which I've burned up thousands of dollars of stainless before I figured out the right forging temperature.
I read from I think it was Nick Anger. He told me not to go a degree above 1175 Celsius, and that's when it clicked because I was going up to about 1180, and the second I would go up to that point, I just see these cracks just open up and stretch out through the billet, and it all just falls apart at that point. And
Right.
you can't forge a welder back together because that bloody chromium won't allow it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so 2175 is 2,147 degrees Fahrenheit. I've in my experience, we've what is it? When I was working with Will Brigham, we're keeping the forge at like 2,100 degrees, just to safely be below that, like 50 degrees below that number, because
Yeah,
if you get
I would have liked to do that,
yeah
but like at that, the thing with stainless is even that 50 degrees, it makes it so much more difficult to forge. I had to get it right on the very brink
right
of nearly burning it to be able to get it to move at all.
yeah
So I didn't have a choice. I was just, risk it or don't do anything.
sure. Well done. You did it.
I'm not going to do it again.
You're not going to do well. What if you went and worked up at Everly and made stainless there?
Look, if I upgrade from the fly press, I'll give it another shot, but I'm not going to be doing it again on the fly press.
Okay.
I've done it once. That's all I need to do.
Are there other makers near you in Tasmania?
There are a handful of makers in Tasmania. There are a couple up north, and there are a few local to me. One of the best ones, in my opinion, is Will Newburn. Let me just double check. I always accidentally call him either Matt or Will. I don't know why I mix up between the two. They're completely different words.
They're very different. Yes.
Yeah. So it's just my brain being weird the way that it is. Will, yeah.
Okay. Will Newburn.
There we go. So sorry, I stuffed up the last word as well because I was thinking of Matthew Newburn.
Okay.
That's why I'm getting confused because Will Newham. That's his name.
Newham.
Yep. So the knives that he creates. So he's a chef knife maker and he does hunting knives as well. But the stuff he does is insane.
What is his? What's his Instagram handle?
Let me find it for you real quick. I think it's Newham Knives.
Newham Knives. I don't know if I'm even spelling this right. How do you spell Newham?
Newham.
Oh. Let's see what we got. Anyway.
Yep, Newham Knives.
Okay. Oh shit.
Yeah, so he's a pretty local fella to me, and he did this this frame handle not too long, a couple of days ago, with I think he counted about 15 pieces in it.
Oh, Jesus.
And it is insane. Yeah. You're looking at it now?
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, yeah. Yeah, he's doing great work.
Yeah. He's got
funny.
an amazing
I'm already
eye
following
detail.
him.
I think I might have mentioned him to you before,
Okay.
but I can't quite remember.
Yeah, he's doing awesome work. Very clean. Good stuff. Oh, I see the frame handle. Holy shit. Yeah. All kinds of pins. He's got a couple liners. Oh, it looks like it's gold, maybe? Or
it's probably
bronze?
brass, I reckon.
Okay. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, that's intense. That's awesome, though.
Yeah, and he's got those 5 pieces on the front spacer as well. It's just we're both just looking at it on our phones.
I know, we're like
it's
on this
crazy.
live chat. We're just looking at our phones. Yeah, people go check it out. Newham Knives. It's right now. It is the 3rd post from the start.
Yeah, that's the one. 4 days ago.
Yeah,
I can't get over that. As well as all of that, he kept those facets so crisp, and it's a tapered frame as well.
I did see that.
That just adds a whole level. I've never done a tapered tang or a tapered frame or anything like that. Because they hurt my head.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of interesting radio right now. Staring at our phones, being like, "What the fuck?" Yeah, I think, and I guess some of these examples that we've already kind of got into, like with the stainless spacers and butt cap on this kind of twist edge wrapped, and I guess it's also spine wrapped feather. But you do a lot of very complex constructions in your handles, and Jesus, talking sucks. Along with these very elaborate feather cuts, and I just really, really have been impressed by your work, because
Thank you very much.
you're doing a lot with what, and I don't know what your shop looks like exactly, but it seems like with
I don't have
little.
a whole lot of tools.
Sure,
I do most of the work with a 2x48 belt grinder, files, a Dremel tool, and a drill press, and a smitten of other things. I don't have any really fancy equipment.
sure.
The disc grinder, that helps so much when it comes to getting like crisp facets and
Oh, yeah.
spaces and that sort of stuff. It's the perfect tool.
Do you have desires to upgrade any of your kit?
Look, I'd like to get into doing engraving.
Okay,
So I'd like to get a nice engraving setup. And then obviously I wouldn't mind a nice power hammer or hydraulic press. But I don't. I'm fine with the equipment I have at the moment. I like the work that I'm putting out.
yeah,
Sure, it's taken a bit of extra time because I don't have the best equipment for the job, but I make it work. So you know, I don't need all the best of the best equipment to just make my workshop look pretty.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's interesting trying to decide like where do you like if you do upgrade, where do you upgrade? Like I only just got my first power hammer. I've never owned a power hammer. I've used them lots of times in the past. But I've been doing this for 10 years now and I'm just getting my first power hammer. And I'm thankful for it now. And I think part of it was like the idea of me kind of like I'm almost 40, so I'm trying to think of how do I want to continue to be able to do like actually physically be able to do this work for
mm,
at least another 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And part of that is taking some of the work off of my body physically and putting it on some of the machines. And so yeah, I wonder if you
yeah,
take that in
I agree
consideration
with
and
you
think
there.
about it from time to time.
Yeah, like I know that I put my body through a lot of hell with that fly press. I try and use the best technique. Like if you watch the videos that I've posted, it all starts with my feet. It's
Mm.
sort of like a boxing stance. Like I use my whole body to swing the
Oh
tool.
yeah, huh?
And it's not like I get a lot of comments, people saying, "Oh, you're gonna have shoulder injuries in 10 years." Blah 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 blah. You don't say this stuff to someone who goes to the gym or someone who, does boxing or javelin or something like that. It's the exact same movement. I do the exact same movement pattern whenever I go to the gym to work out.
Right,
It's just because it's a little bit more dramatic when I do it on the forging press,
right,
on the fly press. So like I'm safe the way that I do it. It did take me quite a while to get good technique.
sure,
Um, but I have no worries about how that's going to affect my health,
sure,
really, or affect my shoulders or anything like that.
right.
But I do. I obviously I don't want to be using that when I'm 50. So I do want to upgrade eventually,
Yeah,
just mainly to save time and get more out of the billets, especially the Damascus billets that I make, because I love the patterns that I create, but they take a lot of time. Because especially when it gets to be a really long billet, it becomes really awkward because
sure,
I need to have my hand holding the billet and have my hand holding the tongue, and I can be holding the handle, and I can be very stretched out
right,
at that point. So it can become very awkward having to use your hands for both holding the steel and doing the hammering. But the main thing is because it takes so long, I lose a lot of my pattern just to oxidation through scale.
oh, interesting.
So if I had a power hammer and I was doing the same sort of pattern, I'd probably end up with twice the amount of steel that I do.
Mm,
Um,
sure,
I'll start with, for example, that mammoth ivory um,
yeah,
one that you put up before with the dragon's breath blade.
yeah.
That one. I think that billet started at about 4.2 kilos, and that's a 240 millimeter integral chef. That's all I got out of it.
Oh wow.
I didn't have any steel left over. So yeah, I lose a whole lot of metal through the process,
I
but
want to get the
you do
conversion
what you
right.
got to do.
You said how many kilos?
I think it started. The billet was about 4.2.
4.2. Okay,
So I
so
think that's
that's
about 10
yeah,
pounds.
just about yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of steel. And
Yeah, it is.
and when you only need a few to make that happen. Well, and it's just like, obviously there's a loss at the end of the billets, and when you do the feather cut, there's a loss there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the feather cut doesn't actually. People like to say, "Oh, it's a really difficult process." You don't lose a whole lot of material doing it because it's a quick process, just driving the feather through it. And as long as you're not being a dickhead with it, it's pretty straightforward. Like it's not that difficult of a process. As long as you have your wedge mounted really strong. Like
Mm.
the main problems I see with, for example, wedges going out the side and not going directly straight through,
Sure.
it's because they're not. If they're using a hydraulic press, for example, it's not mounted properly. It needs to be really secure. It can't have any bend sideways. The second it starts to bend sideways, that just exponentially grows, and the feather cut is just gonna drift all the way to the side.
Right.
So slow and steady, and just have your tooling mounted properly, and have a solid cutter. Don't have a little flimsy, like axe blade or something like that that's going to deform like crazy.
Mm.
And I also see a lot of people using axe heads, like really sharp axe heads. You need a blunt tool to drag the metal. Like
So like
you can't literally cut it. It needs to be a cut and a drag, because I use my cutter probably ends at about maybe half a centimeter, and then it's just got a round radius at the bottom.
okay.
Um, and it also depends a lot how big your billet is compared to how big you want the knife to be compared to how big how big your feather cutter is.
Hmm.
So through all those, you can get a vast array of different stretching levels in the pattern, and each to their own, depending on what you like. Like everyone has their own preference
Yeah.
of how much pattern distortion they want with the feather cut. With the feather cut, but you just need to sort of plan ahead. Basically, don't just go into it half-assed and
Sure.
hope it's going to work out right.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Um, Especially to have it solidly mounted. Um,
Mm.
because
That's the most important thing.
yeah, I had a friend, he actually posted his hot cut the other day, or maybe it was a few months back. But anyways, it looked like it was like half-inch thick, so just over a centimeter thick plate steel with like a 90-degree bevel at the end of it. And that was his cutter. And
Yeah,
it just went whomp right off the side. I was like, oh
I think I
fuck.
saw that one as well. Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about. And
Yeah.
that's the one I was referencing when I did that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Yeah, it's really helpful to have a tapered cutter as well. Have it nice and thick at the top,
Yeah.
because it's going to open up anyway. So you don't need it to be the same thickness all the way along.
Yeah.
That just makes it a lot weaker.
Yeah, you're
I
not
think I
cutting
made
butter or
my
cheese, you're cutting steel, so it's gonna squish out. It's gonna
exactly,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think I made my cutter out of the end of a forklift tine. So
Okay.
it's like 41, 42 steel, something like that, and
Right.
it's just got a nice fat taper
Yeah,
all the way to the top.
that's smart.
So
I like
it's a
that.
nice solid one.
Yeah, and I guess part of when I was talking to you earlier, or mentioning it earlier, that I hadn't done a feather cut. I was actually curious to get some pointers from you. Do you add like I've heard of people adding sacrificial steel at the bottom of their stack so that they do a complete cut through the stack or get a complete drag through the stack.
I've never found that entirely necessary, because that bottom
Okay.
area that you're looking to, add that extra pattern in, that's going to be in your tang anyway.
Hmm.
So, and I always weld a piece of like solid 1080 or like an off-color Damascus onto the bottom of it that I use um, for my tang material.
Hmm.
But I've never really noticed. I think I've done, that sacrificial plate at the bottom once or twice. But when you do that, um, it sort of depends on the way you're doing it. If you do it with like you weld a rod onto that and you just tack weld it onto that plate, then you lose some of the maneuverability, because you need to be able to move the
Oh,
billet in
interesting.
all angles so you can adjust any sort of um any problems that you get throughout the feather cut. Because if your cutter's going this way and the piece is going like this, it can tilt back
Mm,
and forth. It can tilt side to side. So you need to be able to compensate for all that sort of things.
mm,
So I don't like to have a handle welded to my billet,
okay.
and I think it overcomplicates things for me, at least. doing it with that sacrificial piece at the bottom, because after I cut, I reforge them roughly square. I just try and get the mating surfaces flat and have them be the same width and the same height. I don't really, the tops are going to be cupped in like this.
Yeah.
I don't really try and forge those square because it's not really necessary, because though you can, most of that gets welded anyway, and just through drawing out, it doesn't really stretch out to like a big fish mouth or anything. And what is actually quite nice is if you do have too much of that cupping, just fish mouth weld it, and it always looks great.
Yeah.
But yeah, like just take it slow, and play around with different sizes of cutters and different sizes of billets. But yeah, just try not to do too big of a cutter to too small of a billet, and then drawing it out a lot, because then you just get way too much distortion, and the layers can sort of, they go in at the middle, but then they'll sort of come out and then do like an S bend at the edges.
Yeah.
And some people might like that. I personally think it looks really shit.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just each to their own. Everyone has their different opinions of what a perfect feather cut is. So
sure. So it sounds like your stack then is still somewhat tall when you do your feather cut.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's I probably say it's maybe a 2x1 rectangle.
Okay.
I'd say on average. Really, it just depends on how much steel I have and the shape of the steel that I forged it out to.
Okay.
And it also depends on the knife that I'm gonna be making. If I'm gonna be making, recently I actually forged out a sushi sword.
Oh, cool.
And I tried to make that billet as absolutely tall as I could, and I made a new cutter as well because my old cutter wasn't tall enough.
Okay.
So that one was probably a 3-to-1 ratio of height. But it also depends on if you're going to make one knife or two knives or three knives out of it. I know that Kevin Casey, he's done thousands of billets of feather Damascus, and he's got a very good process. He uses a log splitter, and all his billets are always the same size, and it's always in a jig, so it can't have any sideways movements. I
just saw those recently.
Yeah, it's the best way to do it if you are doing it in a production method like his, with all the billets are the exact same size. Yeah. I can't do it like that because I'm always using different types of steel, different patterns, all that sort of jazz. But if you can do a cut on a big feather like that, then re-weld it back together. Say that billet is 200 mil long, 9 inches long or so. Then you can just cut slices off with a bandsaw off the face of it, and just you get multiple hidden tang knives out of it or something like that,
right?
Rather than cutting a chunk off the end and then stretching it out. That's how you get really crisp layers. If you can weld the billet when it is close to the size of knife that you want to make,
right,
then you can just cut slices off it, and you don't need to worry about the pattern distorting too much by stretching it out a lot.
Yeah, like cutting slices off a loaf of bread. I've heard of people basically referring to that as slabbing off, cutting a slab.
Yeah, I'd say that's that's a good term.
Yeah. God damn it! I had another question about feather. Oh, so I feel like I see people wanting to try to just take the whole cut all in one foul swoop. But it seems like in my experience, like I've done some bow tie cutting, and I found that small cuts or small bites at a time really help, one, with control, and two, just like with keeping things where I guess that's still control, but keeping things where you want them to do. And if you need to do any kind of correcting, then you have time to make that adjustment if you haven't already just gone right straight through the thing, right?
Yeah, that really depends on your process. Like, with Kevin Casey, he's done the same thing 1,000 times, so he knows it's going to work. He knows he doesn't need to take little bites and watch how it's going. He can just, put the press on and just cut it all the way down in one fell swoop. But if you haven't done it too much, or if you don't have a jig like that, it is really helpful to go really slowly. The only reason I think you would want to do it all in one cut, if you haven't got some sort of jig or something like that, is if you are immediately hot welding it back together. I've seen some people do that where they don't reflatten the pieces and then regrind them and re-weld it all together. They'll just do a hot weld, just get all the scale off, chuck some borax on it, and re-weld it together. I don't like the idea of that because it's a bit of a risky procedure. You never know. You can get some, you can get borax trapped in the layers and stuff like that. And if
Right.
you've already gone through all of that effort to get a nice, mosaic or W's pattern, whatever you're going for,
Yeah.
and then to cut it in half, just take the extra time to forge them flat, grind them clean, put them back together, so you know that the final weld, which is the most important, because it's going against the way that you are forging the blade,
Right.
you know that that's solid.
Yeah.
Like that's the most important word of them all. I think I might have had a discussion with Kevin Casey previously. I think he told me that, or it might have been a comment on a Facebook group post. I think he said he sands his pieces to 400 grit minimum before
Okay.
he re-welds them back together.
Okay.
Because really, you can't go overboard with that final weld because it's the most important of all of them. Because all the previous welds have
Right.
been consolidated through the process. They're never going to open up.
Yeah, I usually, especially on the final weld, when I'm doing any kind of tile stuff, I like to take my pieces up to at least a 220 grit finish.
Mm.
And it just, the cleaner and flatter the pieces are, the easier they're going to weld together. And that helps you actually not necessarily have to go through a lot of reduction. You can get a solid first round of welding set, maybe a second one, keep it still relatively tall, and then I can see going straight to the hot cut after that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think when I do my final, stack up of all the tiles, I always finish on the disc sander.
Sure.
Just because I like that extra level of accuracy of everything being exactly right.
Yeah.
I usually go to 180, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
But that extra sort of level of flatness that you get on a disc sander or a disc grinder compared to a belt grinder,
Yep.
I think that sort of compensates as well for not having to go as high of a grit.
Yeah.
And I've never really had any problems with that.
That's great.
So that works for me.
And honestly, I have a disc sander. I just don't really make use of it very often, but that is definitely the time to do it, is when those tiles are coming back together.
I love it. The disc sander. I had it in the top of my shed for about 6 months after I bought it.
Oh.
And I finally got to using it doing I think it's one of the knives that I sent you, the really long one. With the heirloomed handle. I used it for those spaces, and like it was just,
Is it this one?
it just clicked. Yeah. Oh no, sorry, it was the other one with the fiddleback blackwood handle. The really long. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah, so I used that for doing the heirlooming on those spaces, and it was just it just clicked that this is the exact tool I need to do that job.
Right. Yeah, that's a great piece. Again, with the edge welded.
Oh, that is the craziest Damascus I've ever done. The more you look at it, the crazier it gets.
There's more stuff going on.
Yeah. So the core pattern is it's a
Oh Jesus.
Yeah.
I just saw.
It's a double mosaic feather.
Yeah.
That I then what's the name of the weld where you cut from top, bottom, and then open it up? That's the one. Yeah, I accordion cut that.
I can see that. Yeah.
And then my initial plan for those edge bars was that is actually a feather cut mosaic.
Okay.
And I cut it almost all the way through. I didn't cut it all the way through. Then I wanted to wrap it around the tip so that it would have the movement and then all match up to an explosion pattern at the tip. But I had a weld flaw in that, so I had to cut it short, which is a really big shame. But then at the corner of the bolsters, it gets even nuttier because I forged in the integral bolster with the core pattern, but then I didn't forge the edge bars with thickness for it. So I put in the corner of the bolsters, I put in a piece of twist Damascus on each side of it to fill up those corners.
Holy shit.
So that's a 1, 2, 3.
There's a
4,
lot going on.
Like a 5-piece Damascus composite.
Ay.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so interesting because when you were talking about making long feather, I was like, oh, I wonder if anybody's like made a feather and then tiled it feather. But basically doing this accordion is effectively kind of a tiling effect.
Yeah, I considered doing a tile, but I love the continuous flow that a feather pattern has, and I
Sure.
didn't want it to be broken up with each of those tile welds. And I thought with the accordion, it is a continuous flow. Where it connects, it just opens up and shows the inside of the layers.
Hmm.
So it just works with the whole length of the pattern, and I think that's got to be one of my favorite patterns I've ever done. I really need to
Hmm.
redo it because it's really cool.
So do you have a TIG welder? How are you when you're doing your tiles and getting them sticking back together? And if this is a trade secret, you don't have to tell me, but
I just got a
um
shitty stick welder.
and so when you're laying up your mosaic tiles, you're using the stick welder to
So
get
funny
everything stuck
thing,
together or
I've
bring it
I've
back together.
only ever actually done one tile weld of the
Okay,
filachetti flip style.
sure.
Um, and that didn't work out very well.
Okay,
But you notice basically everything I do is feather, just because so I don't need to do a tile weld because they're not the simplest thing to do. It's a lot
sure.
more difficult process than just stacking them up and drawing it out. And also, I like explosion mosaics and tiled mosaics. I think they're cool, but I always get drawn back to the natural flow from heel to tip of feather. I
Hmm.
can't really beat it
Yeah,
in my opinion.
that's fair. That's
So
totally fair. No,
yeah,
I love it. I really appreciate and respect what you're doing with the feathers because, like I said, I was like I understood the interest in feathers, and I can see how like for a collector, they're like, wait, you're gonna cut that billet in half and then weld it back together? That's the craziest thing I ever heard of. But still, like seeing all these basic feather patterns, I'm like, at
yeah. Look,
first I was kind of like,
I'm
fuck feathers.
yeah,
They suck
I'm
and
not a
blah.
fan of W's feather because
Okay,
everyone does it. And it kind of annoys me in the bladesmithing community is when someone talks about a feather pattern, they just think it's like a final end all. Like, you have to do W's and then you have to cut it. Like, it's just a forging process. It's just like resquaring
sure.
you know, or like doing a four way. It's just a process that you can add to other Damascus elements. So you can do whatever you want with the initial pattern,
Yeah.
and you can sort of think about it in your mind the way that it's going to pull those layers in,
Hmm.
um, and just experiment with it. And you can also do, post feather forging. I kind of want to do I want to feather cut a billet and then four way it, or re-square it in four way, and make an explosion pattern out of that,
Mm.
and then maybe re-feather it after that. The possibilities are
Mm.
endless, really, with mosaic, because you can just
Yeah.
there are so many different things you can do
Right.
between twist Damascus and feather cutting and different um, distortion techniques of reshaping the billet, and stuff like I can't remember his name, but Prince Works Forge. The
Oh yeah.
stuff that he does and the way his mind works with his patterns is
Yeah.
just out of this world. I
Yeah.
can't I can't grasp how he comes up with those ideas.
I think so it's Joshua Prince.
Yeah, that's
And
one. And Charles
and
Ellis as well. He is bonkers.
yeah, and Joshua, especially I believe it was his father was an instructor at an art school, and so growing
Oh,
up,
okay.
Joshua had a lot of exposure to art and different art
Oh, you can
techniques,
see that in his work. Yeah,
and
it's
yeah,
got one of the most unique styles of knife design that I've seen.
yeah. I used to refer to what I did with designing patterns as painting with steel, but Josh really does kind of paint with steel, and the way he
He really
combines
does.
elements, it looks like a painting in metal, and it's
Mm.
fucking nuts. And so I've actually kind of backed off of that because seeing his stuff, I'm like,
You can't
no,
compete with him.
that
You really
that
can't.
is more painting with steel. I'm not painting with steel. He is. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I absolutely agree with you. I think that using the feather cutting or feathering is similar to doing the bow tie, which is basically cutting from both directions, which is a really old
Is
technique,
that
actually.
the one with doing a 45 on both sides? That how
Yes,
you create a radial pattern? Yeah.
that's how some of the early radial patterns were being made. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the patterns. I did a Master Smith, a mosaic Damascus Master Smith with Carl Royer when he came
Okay.
down for the Australian Symposium 2
Was
or
that
3
last
years
year?
ago, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, a couple of years
I
then.
think it was 2020 or 2019. I'm not quite remember.
Okay.
But after, so we all did our explosion patterns, for our own work, and then if we had extra time, I did a twist explosion pattern as well. But then as
Yeah.
a group effort at the end, we did a really big radial pattern, and that was the first time I'd seen that bow tie cutting style,
Sure.
and that just opened up my mind to because I'd only really thought of the most basic levels of pattern distortion before then.
Sure.
And then just seeing that and realizing you can do all sorts of different shapes to
Yeah.
make the layers go the way you want them to,
Right. Yeah, and
and then
I
just
yeah. I really like that you see the feather cutting technique not as the end, but as a process that can be used in a continuation of pattern development. I have had some I have some designs that I've drawn out that I haven't made yet, but they use a feather. And part of me is a little scared to do them just because I've never done a feather before. But I think I need to step up and do them just because I think they'd be super
but if
fun.
you've done bow tie, then you can do feather. It's not a
Okay.
a majorly different process.
Okay. Well, that helps. It helps me feel a little bit more confident about it.
You got it, mate. If not, just give it another shot.
Sure. So I want to ask you, so you've made anvils out of railroad track, you've made hammers, you make these awesome chef's knives, these complicated, and not just making great chef's knives, but making them out of incredibly complicating and very interesting patterns. Um, where do you find your focus right now? Is it continuing with knives? Is it doing hammers? Is it having a balance of both? And where do you want to go with your smithing? I mean, it sounds like you want to get into engraving work and maybe some carving work. Did you say, or was it just engraving?
Oh, both. I mean,
Sure.
like with the knives, I don't want to set myself a limit of what I want to become, because I'm so inspired by the various mastersmiths around the world and the crazy things that people are doing. Like Rodrigo Sfredo, he came down to the 2018 knife symposium, and I saw some
Yeah.
of his knives in person, and like that just blew my mind. The amount of detail and the sculpting and carving and stuff that he does now. I
Yeah.
remember the Bowie. Are you aware of the Jim Bowie project?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so the knife that he created on that, he had like, inlaid geckos and like inlaid animals on top of the stippled integral bolster, and like that sort of thing just blows my mind. Like the way
Sure.
that you can sort of add different levels of techniques from different different crafts all into this one process, because it's a metalworking process, it's a woodworking process. You can add engraving, you can add inlay, you can add, sculpting, bloody anything.
Right.
So really, there's no limit on what you can do with a custom knife,
Yeah.
and I want to make them as fancy as possible. Basically, I look at my knives as like physical works of art, basically, that still do the job that they're intended to do.
Sure.
So I can't. I make them in mind of making them pretty enough that people don't want to use them. But if they have to use them, then they'll still do the job they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Um, and with the hammers, it I sort of go back and forth with the hammers, because I do enjoy making them. It'd be a lot simpler process if I had more than one heavy forging tool, because I could make the process a lot smoother and a lot quicker.
Hmm.
Like if I had a fly press and a power hammer, or a fly press and a hydraulic press, or the magic combination of all three,
Yeah.
I'd be able to greatly reduce the amount of time it takes for me to make them. And in return, I probably enjoy the process a bit more, because I've done some production orders
Sure.
for a couple of different companies with the hammers, and those sort of just suck the life out of me. Doing
I
the same
believe it.
thing over and over again, 20 times. Um, so yeah, I go back and forth about what I want to do with the hammers, but I don't want to cut them out completely, and I want to keep making the knives. I would like to have a healthy balance of both.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, we'll just see how it goes, I guess.
Sure. Where do you ever find yourself feeling I don't know, burned out or uninspired to be in the workshop? Um, and if you do, how do you get yourself like? Do you ever basically like kind of get into a making funk, a creativity funk, and how do you find your way out of that funk?
I never look with the knives. I never really struggled to come up with new ideas because
Okay.
I never stop thinking. You know, like if I'm trying to get to bed at night, I've got Damascus ideas going through my head and different handle layouts and all that
Hmm.
sort of stuff. So I've always got a new idea that I want to try. I do get sort of that burned out space between finishing off a really big project and realizing I don't have any knives that are like halfway through being made
Mm,
sitting in the drawer. So I got to restart completely from the very beginning because I like
yeah,
having a bunch of knives in various stages. Like I like to have, some billets I'm working on, as well as some knives that are heat treated and forged to shape, and some knives that are, in their final grinding and handle finishing stages. So I
yeah,
can sort of, I don't need to stick to one level of the process
I see.
and just continue until it finishes. I can sort of jumble in between,
Yeah,
depending on, if I'm tired in the morning and I don't feel like I've got the eye for detail of, doing final grinding of a knife or, grinding in facets or something, I can just get the forge going and crank out some steel because you don't
sure.
need a lot of big brains to be able to do that. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I've always managed to sort of figure out a way out of the funk if I fall into one.
Sure. And I think that's really good advice is to keep things kind of being able to mix it up and having things at different stages.
Mm.
So that, based on the day and how you're feeling, you can jump into any of those different phases of the process to be able to still get work done rather than being like, oh, I got to start all the way at the beginning and work all the way through to the end.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the main area where I get into a funk of like, oh, gotta do it all over again from the bloody beginning.
right. Um, oh shit, I had another question for you and it just fell out of my brain.
It just flew away.
Yeah, my ADHD is starting to show. Um, so you've done some shows in Australia. Have you traveled abroad for any shows? Have you been to the US for Blade Show or
I
gone to
haven't, no.
Paris for any of their
It's
next shows?
like it's on the list. I definitely should be doing Blaze Show one of these years. I always forget to prepare.
Mm,
I'll just be doing my own thing, and then I realize, oh, it's 2 months until the next knife show. I don't have time to make anything. I'll skip to the next one.
sure.
But I've only done two knife shows in Australia, and they were quite a while ago before I did my course with Carl Roy, and before I really started to expand on what I was able to do with knife making. But it's a great thing to put faces to makers and be able to meet everyone and get new ideas from fellow smiths and all that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
I do definitely need to get back into the going to the knife shows. But yeah, also only because I'm a very competitive person. So if I'm going to knife shows, I'm going for those awards,
I got you.
100%. Yeah.
And I feel like you did win awards. Have you won? Am I mistaken?
So off when I went to the Sydney Knife Show, this was 2018, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, 5 years ago. That
Yeah.
was when I made my first mosaic Damascus hammer, and that one almost won Best in Show. But
Oh
I
wow.
heard that they couldn't make it win Best in Show because it was a hammer at a knife show, so they just couldn't let it. They couldn't let it happen.
Okay.
I was a bit salty about that, but oh well. Um, but yeah, since then I haven't done any other shows that have
Okay.
awards. I did Canberra. My dad's staring at me through the mirror. Can you fuck off? Um,
Dad. He's just
um,
giving you some weird. He's just like, "How's it going in there?"
he's just making some faces. Yeah.
Quality
Um,
dad move.
yeah, you can't beat him. But yeah, so I did the Canberra knife show. I think the year after that, but that's a much smaller knife show. That was at Thorough Valley Forge where I did the symposium and the Damascus masterclass. So they weren't doing awards at that show.
Okay.
But there was a an online knife making awards that's there's a Australian company. They were called Creative Man. They're now called Nordic Edge.
Oh yeah.
It's a knife supply store here. One of the best ones,
Yeah.
in my opinion. They've got the best customer service. Always get their orders out on time. There is another one which is more well known, which I do not like.
Okay.
I'm not going to name names, but
Okay.
they're not great. Yeah, so they did a online competition, and I entered the first year that they did that, and I took out the first place prize for that. And my prize was a free table at one of the upcoming knife shows, but that was
Oh shit.
pre-COVID, before they all got cancelled. So I still got that in my back pocket.
Okay. Oh,
I've got a
nice.
free table. Yeah, so I don't need to fork out any money for the next show, other than
That's great.
get the
Just gotta
flight,
get up there.
accommodation, that sort of stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But then annoyingly, the next year, I got my times wrong. I was gonna submit a chef knife that I made, but I left it too late, and I didn't get to enter that one. So,
Oh shit.
oh well. At least I got the first place in the first show. So
Yeah.
that's something.
That has happened to me before in the past. And for anybody who think they might be going to Blade Show, make sure you're paying attention and you got a table and you're going to submit something for one of the awards. Make
Will
sure
Stelter
you
did that as well, didn't he?
possibly. I could
I
see
think
it
he did.
happening. Will's a great guy. Sometimes.
Speaking of Will, did you see
timing.
that recent blackout chef he did with the angled integral bolster?
Yeah. Let me pull it back up. Just double check. Make sure I'm thinking of the
I
right one.
absolutely love his style of making. It's such an aggressive, like all of his designs are really aggressive and like to the point, and I love
Oh
that
yeah.
way of designing them.
No, it's good. You're okay. Yeah. It's just he just posted it not that long ago. I guess it's about 10 days ago.
Hmm.
But yeah, blacked out handle. Yeah, it's beautiful. I think I actually saw that while I was there at his. Oh, it actually has a Hamon on it. Just noticing now, unless that's finger marks. Anyways, I saw that when I was over working with him at his shop.
Hmm.
And I guess that brings me. I find that my ADHD lost its way, and I remember what I was gonna say. I was gonna ask you, are there makers who are current mentors to you? You said there are a few makers that are close to you, that you talk to often. Who were early inspirations and who continue to be inspirations? And who are some makers? I mean, it's like 4 questions in one, but who are some makers that you would love to either learn from or learn with or work with in the future? Being a young guy, like you're
Yeah.
basically a young guy, so we're like you, and it's cool that you're 23 and you're already so fucking accomplished and doing such great work. It's kind of incredible. And so all I see is just like there's still so much time in front of you. Like, where do you
Yeah.
see? Yeah, what were some inspirations, and then who are people you want to work with and things you want to do?
Yeah, well, I started off my first big inspiration, which was you. You're the reason I got into doing chef knives in the first place,
Really?
because yours are some of the favorite ones out there for me.
Okay, I'll
Um,
take it.
yeah, well, look, I have lots of inspirations for different stuff that I'm doing, like Rodriguez Fredo, Carl Royer. I originally got the idea of my inlays from Oliver Goldsmith,
Mm,
who they're sort of his thing, but I sort of adopted a little bit.
yeah.
Um, but it's a bit of an ego thing, to be honest, that I don't really want to learn from anyone one-on-one at this point,
Okay.
because it's not cheating at all, but I want to do it the hard slogging way. Basically, just learning from trial and error of me doing it, just
Yeah.
learning off of, YouTube videos and online resources, that sort of stuff,
Sure.
rather than a one-on-one lesson style sort of thing where someone
Yeah.
is showing me over my shoulder how to do something.
That's
It's just,
that,
I don't know.
no,
It's purely ego, really, and just stubbornness of trying to be the most sole authorship type of maker that I can,
mhm.
without you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the Knife Talk podcast, we had somebody ask a question the other day. Or no, sorry, didn't ask a question. Jeff had posted something. People were berating him with questions of like very specific question. Like he did a serrations thing, and he did like a minute video of his process. And honestly, like it was for the people that were ready to really try it. Everything he put out there was more than enough.
Yeah,
But
he
people,
put that video on his Instagram, didn't he?
yeah, and
Yeah, I
so
saw that one.
yeah, people were then private messaging him like, what's the spacing between each scalp, and how deep are you cutting, and what grid are you cutting? It's like, and so we had a
That's all that sort
conversation.
of shit is just, whatever you want to do. Like he gave you the base instructions, just figure it
Yeah,
out from there. Use your brain.
well, and that's what the conversation was around. Is like there's this kind of like roll your sleeves up factor, and it's like, okay, I saw this thing, I don't know all the answers, but now I'm gonna try and puzzle it out. And it's like,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, and I feel the same way. I try to I try to bother people as little as possible. It's a rare occasion when I do reach out to somebody. I'm like,
Hmm.
I've been trying to do this thing and I can't fucking figure it out, and I've been making all these mistakes. Can you
Yeah,
help me?
sometimes you just sort of have to reach out. If you just can't figure it out,
Yeah.
you know, you just gotta ask.
Yeah, but I think it's still important. I don't know. It's for me and the way I learn and want to do things. I think I'm probably stubborn, and also like it comes from a position of ego as well, where like I want to feel like I accomplished this on my own.
I
I
know
figured this
exactly
out
where
on
you're
my
coming
own.
from. Yeah.
Um, and I think that a lot of people just want to be told the answer, and it's like me even just like fixing the brakes on my truck, like I was talking about at the top of the podcast, is
Mm.
just like having that sense of self-sufficiency, and that sense of accomplishment. Like I think all humans want that, but I feel like at the same time it doesn't have as much value when somebody just told you the answer versus you figuring it out.
100%. Yeah. Like I'm not a person who's like, oh, I got trade secrets, you can never know that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I'll give if someone asks me about a process, like ask me how I do my handle inlays or something, I'll give them the basis of how I do it. I use a Dremel to carve out the slot, and then I it's just a slow fitting job of marking the area of the slot with the inlay, and
Mhm.
just slowly making it fit, and then curving the edges in, blah 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 blah. But then if you're asking me more detailed questions from that point, just figure it out yourself. It's just trial and error. Just give it a go.
Right.
I'm not your dad.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. I would be curious. Do you get a lot of messages of people being like, "How'd you make that steel? And how thick is that at the edge? And how are you getting that grind? And how are you doing that handle?"
Surprisingly, not a massive amount. I've gotten a couple, and I try and answer them when I get them without going
Sure.
into crazy detail because I don't want to hold their hand through the whole process.
Yeah.
The most common question I get by far is, "What size fly press do you recommend?"
Mm,
Yeah. But with the process of how I'm doing everything, not a whole lot, to be honest.
okay.
I don't get a massive amount of people asking about, specifics of how I do things and that sort of stuff.
Right. Well, that's good.
Mm,
Allows you to stay focused on getting your work done and be less frustrated by people.
yeah.
Um, I want to go through some of these pictures that you sent. So you
Go
sent
ahead, let me
five.
brag.
Yeah, exactly. So you sent me, what is it, 6 pictures? We've already looked at a couple of them, but I just kind of want to go into more detail about what's going on with each of these individual knives. So this first one, I believe you said, is the Dragonfire Mosaic feather cut blade. It's got an ivory handle. It's got a domed pin. Couple,
Mhm.
it looks like a Damascus spacer and some
Yep.
other spacer material. It's got the pump, like the inlay on the pommel. And I like the detail line, like the shape, the swervy line when you look at it from the profile.
Yeah, I
Um,
wanted to keep that one really simple,
yeah,
because, that was my first time doing a full mammoth ivory handle. I've done
okay.
2 of those now. Um,
I've
that
done
stuff
zero.
is it's beautiful material to work with, but you gotta keep it cool, you can't let it overheat.
Mm.
Smells like trash. But it polishes up so beautifully, and it's got this natural pattern in it, that shows up when you give it a nice polish.
Okay.
But yeah, I didn't want to add too many facet lines to that just because I wanted it to be a simple aesthetic design without going
Yeah.
too overboard because that's already $600 worth of hand material.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you said Dragon's Fire, that's Dragon's Breath,
Sorry,
or
Dragon's
slightly
Breath.
different. I should make a new pattern called Dragon's Fire. Although I think that's actually already a pattern.
I
Oh
have
well.
one called Dragon's Fire because
Yeah, there we go.
Bill Burke already had a Dragon's Breath.
Yeah. I still can't get over how perfect it was that I accidentally made his pattern and I accidentally called it what he
The
calls it.
exact same thing.
So I didn't need to change jack shit.
Yeah.
Bloody perfect. So yeah, so that's a peened nickel silver pin, and then the
Okay.
inlay is, I wanted to have both the textures of mammoth ivory. So that's the core mammoth ivory is the handle, and then the inlay is the ivory bark.
I got you.
So it's
That's
got
cool.
it's got a bit of physical texture in it.
Yeah.
That you can still feel. But then it's got those nice dark tones from the outside of the ivory. And yeah, that spacer, I'm pretty sure it's a twist mosaic. I'm pretty sure. I love doing those
Oh yeah, yeah.
three-piece spacers behind the integral bolster. It adds a lot of weight to it. But honestly, I don't mind a big hefty chef knife as long as the balance is
Sure.
right. You don't really
Yeah.
notice it. But yeah, those sort of heirloom spacers are one of my favorite things to do. Mainly
Nice.
because not a whole lot of other people do it with integral chef knives.
Right.
And then
Yeah. Oh,
the
go
thin
ahead.
spacers are zirconium, which I love using. It's such a cool
Interesting.
material.
I've never used it. How does it?
Yeah.
How does it cut and grind?
It's like titanium. It's very gummy when you're just hogging
Interesting.
away at it. It doesn't polish very high. You can't get a mirror polish out of it. It gets very cloudy. But to get that jet black color, you just heat it up to red and just let it air cool, and it creates this black oxide, which is a really, really durable finish. Like it takes
Wow.
a fair bit of sanding to get it to come off.
Oh shit.
But yeah, I just love, like, sometimes I use nickel silver for those thin spaces. Sometimes I use zirconium. I just like the high light and dark contrast that you can get with those sort of materials.
And you got a really great contrast on this particular piece. And if people want to see this, you can go check out the podcast on the YouTube channel. But the contrast is awesome.
That was like my 12th attempt at getting that contrast right.
Okay. All
It was
right.
a big process.
Been there.
Yeah, so I make it more difficult on myself with the
Okay.
polish that I put on my blades, because I love a really high polish. I don't like a matte finish. I like a high polish and a high depth and a high contrast, which is really hard to get all of those together. Like
100%.
for example, Salem Strobe I can't remember the name of his company, but yeah, there we go.
Forge. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think he only sands to about 400 or 600 grit before he etches, and then he'll do like 2500 grit polish after ferric. But his contrast is always absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
Like he gets amazing results.
Yeah.
But the higher polish you do, the more difficult it is to get that coffee darkening to be consistent all the way along the blade.
Yeah.
Because you get little patchy bits that are cloudy in some areas where it won't connect at all. And it's very temperamental, because I used to get like really, really solid results. Even with sanding up to 1500 grit before etch and doing up to 7000 grit post etch polishing, I'll do like 3 or 4 etching cycles to get the depth and bump up the pattern. I think a lot of it comes down to those really large areas of black, those really large areas of the carbon steel. If I'm doing a tighter pattern, like pattern I used to do a fair bit is called Murder of Crows. It's it's not a feather. It's just a sort of it comes down to the pattern layout in the initial starting of the billet.
Okay.
And then it's some sort of explosion resquaring process. Can't quite remember. I haven't done it in a couple of years.
Sure.
But when I used to do those, that was my etching process with a high polish, and I'd always get really good results with coffee for that. But the more bold patterns I do, like the dragon's breath, that sort of stuff, with really thick areas of black, that's when it becomes really, really frustrating to get a really high contrast finish.
Yeah.
And that's why I really want to try out that gator piss, because I've seen amazing results out of that.
Yeah, the gator piss is shocking. I've only done a little bit of experimenting with it, and it was really recently, like within the last month.
It looks like exactly what I need, because I've seen people do full blown mirror polishes, and they get just incredible levels of contrast while keeping that mirror polish, and that's exactly what I want to get.
Yeah. Well, and also the thing that really surprised me was the durability of the black. Like the first thing I did after I got a decent contrast etch on a blade was like, all right, now let's see what it takes to take it off. And I did on one side, I did some sanding and polishing with like a sunshine cloth or something, like a
Mm.
polishing cloth and stuff like that. And then on the other side, I took it to the buffer and was buffing on it, and it wasn't ripping the black out. It was actually making it like a really glossy black color. And
Oh,
I was like,
really?
what the fuck is going on here? Like, why is this staying so well? It was pretty amazing.
Mm.
Um,
I just need to wait
I
for them to be able to have a supplier over here because they can't import it internationally. They just recently started doing it in Europe, but I
okay.
still got to wait. I'm hoping that maybe I can cozy up to them enough so that they can tell me how the hell they made it and give me the mixture recipe, but I doubt it.
What? Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to do it abroad would just be to license the way and just have a contract that's very clear that like you don't tell people how this is made. But it would make more sense that especially like in Australia and or maybe a supplier in the UK or in the EU could make it there. That would cut down on so much cost just
Yeah,
to
that's the
ship
way they're
it.
doing it in Europe at the
Okay.
moment. I can't remember what the supplier is off the top of my head.
Yeah,
But yeah, they've got anywhere in Europe now you can get that stuff.
that's good. Yeah, it's interesting. I would like to play with it more. I've talked with JB Blades over on Instagram. He does
Oh,
really
those
great.
carving he does on those
Yeah.
blades. Oh my god, I can't fathom how he does that. That's the kind of thing I wouldn't be able to. I mean, look, I'm sure I would be able to figure it out, but it would be very beneficial to ask how he does that. To
Right.
be able to make it so even and so
Yeah.
symmetrical from side to side.
Yeah, that's what's really amazing to me too, is how he's getting it, yeah, just so clean and even side
Mm.
to side. And
And polishing
consistent.
that up as well, because he always goes for a full mirror polish. Polishing it up in like on the inside of all those carvings he does must be
Yeah.
so time consuming.
Yeah, I had a really nice chat with him the other day, just privately and talking about the gator piss after my short experience with it. And it does from what he was saying, it's not necessarily like a quick and easy solution. There's a little bit of prep work to go into it, but like you can see on his work, like the results, if you get things dialed in and your process dialed in, they're fucking phenomenal.
Oh yeah,
It's
it's
so beautiful.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
I can't get over how good his finishes look. It's just
yeah.
it's exactly what I want, but I can't just give me the gator piss. I need it.
Give me the cannon pass. All right. Well, I know you got to get back to it. You got some work you got going on today, and I want to say thank you so
I can
much.
keep going for a little bit more if you want. I have no problems.
Oh, actually, that is a good point. We do have a question from the Patreon, and it is regarding. I think it was regarding your inlays on the pommels. So Mark Smith asks, "I'm curious about your inlaid butt cap attachment. Are you just gluing it, or do you include some sort of anchor?" And like you said, the inspiration for that comes from Oliver Goldschmidt. Oliver talked about his process a little bit. He didn't get in like super fine detail, but just kind of like the broad strokes, I guess,
Mm.
of how he goes into it. But I'd love to hear how you're approaching it, if you
Yeah.
don't
Well,
mind
look.
sharing.
Yeah, of course. So Oliver, he's got a couple of videos up on his YouTube, and
Oh,
he's got a fair bit of his process about that. But the way that I fix them in, I just use epoxy. I just rough up the inside of the inlay and the underside of the sorry, the inside of the inlay pocket and the underside of
right.
the inlay.
Okay.
And I just use good old oh god, what's the name of it? The go-to knife epoxy. West
Oh,
Systems.
like
There we go.
yeah, West System, like G Flex,
Yeah,
or not G Flex, West Systems.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, I use that. I've never had any problems with it because I get the inlays nice and deep anyway. So there's
sure,
no way you're going to be able to pry it out. And push comes to shove, knock on wood, if it did fall out, which I feel like it's never going to, it's very easy to put it back in.
sure,
Um, but I feel like if you wanted, I have done this a couple times. You can solder like a brass rod or something to the inside of
sure.
the inlay. This is actually really helpful for um, doing the whole fitment as well because you have
Okay,
a way to index it. onto the handle rather than sort of just placing it there and trying to get it all even on the handle.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a more a much more robust way of fitting it. But it's not necessary to go to that level
Yeah, I think for
of
the
fitting it
epoxy
in.
to fail, somebody would have had to done something really gnarly, either to get it way too hot for
Yeah.
the epoxy to fail, or to have dropped it from a distance. And even still, like,
If they would have
or
done
do
that, they would
something
have cracked
really
the handle
abusive.
as well.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah,
Like there are a lot more problems than just the butt cap popping out.
yeah. So
Um,
yeah, that thing's never going to be coming out unless you try and make it pop out.
mhm. And then another person. So where do people find you? You have a website. You have social media.
So at the moment, I'm only on Instagram.
Okay,
I have plans to get a website going so I can do,
sure.
um, hammers made to order and post my stuff
Okay,
up available on there because I'm doing everything through Instagram at the moment, just making for sale posts and
sure.
if you want a hammer, send me a DM, that sort of stuff,
Right.
which isn't really that great of a business method because stuff gets buried over time through posts and it's hard for people to figure out what knives I do have for sale at all times. I try
Okay.
and repost them every now and again. But
Hmm.
yeah, so my Instagram is Ellard Blacksmithing.
Okay.
And then I will hopefully soon I will get a website up and going as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Websites have gotten really easy these days. And honestly, like, even if it's just a landing place where
I'll
you
get one
can
of
set
those
up.
Squarespace discounts, I reckon.
Yeah.
The Squarespace promo codes, everyone's doing them.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just to either like use it as a portfolio so people can see past work. If
Mm,
you want to talk about yourself, you can talk about your background. And then, set up a store, and stores, some stores can be really complicated. They can also be super simple. And
yeah.
on my Instagram, I use a link tree, and that makes it a quick reference, like a hot link. Basically, people can hit that one, and it goes to as a reference to, like, I got the calendar going, and I got all this other stuff going on. So and I can juggle that around and rearrange it and organize it, and it's really easy to use. But when it comes to sales, like, yeah, whatever you can do to streamline the process from somebody saying, I want that, to being able to pay you, the better, because any lag in that process gives people a chance. And that sounds like you're trying to trick people, or I'm trying to encourage people, tricking people into buying stuff they don't actually want. Um, it's just, I know, even from my own experience, if I have to, like, I hit a link and then it takes me to another page, and then that page doesn't actually have the thing, and then I gotta go to their homepage and we'll find their store. It's like, at that point,
Yeah.
and maybe I'm just too ADD, but I'm just like, fuck
Oh, I'm the
this.
same way. It
I'm
needs to
done.
be a streamlined process. Yeah. I feel like that's also, I'm very anti, computer technology. I can't get my head around it. Even though I'm a bloody young little chappy, it's not my thing. Um, so, spreadsheets and website designs just kill me now. Um, so yeah, everything has just been through DMs. You send me a message about something that I've got available. I'll tell you the details. I'll tell you the price. Blah blah blah
Mhm.
blah. I feel like that is the most streamlined process personally, because you're talking
Yeah,
straight to the person who made it rather than
sure.
adding to a cart, putting any details, blah 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 blah. You can ask me
Yeah,
whatever questions you want about this product if I don't already have the details in the post or something like that.
yeah,
And I feel like that's sort of that might be part of the reason why I haven't already gotten a website going up, just because I like that connectivity. I guess that sort
sure.
of intimate level of buying a
Right.
product.
It's
Um,
a unusual
yeah,
thing for somebody your age. You actually want to connect
each
with
to their
people.
own.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm an old
Well,
soul. I like me some Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles.
there you go. Long walk on the beach. Okay, I think we did it. I can't wait for us to. I would love to meet you in person. Um, I actually, that same year Rodrigo Sofredo came down, I was supposed to be there that year.
Oh,
Um,
really?
and there were some complications in working things out, and so it didn't end up happening. I have been talking to Kev Slattery about kind of coordinating things to get back down to Australia
Mm.
and do some work. But we haven't done it yet, and COVID really kind of threw a wrench into a lot of things. But after all that, hopefully, can make something happen in the next couple of years. It would be great. I would love to come down, bring the family down, and hang out down there and meet. And it's I've never been to Australia,
Oh, you
so
should.
great to see it.
Be sure to everyone on the mainland will tell you that Tasmania is a shithole, and
Oh, really?
we're all related. We all got two heads. It's an inside Australian joke, but in my humble opinion, as someone who has only ever lived in Tasmania and hates the mainland,
Okay.
it is the most beautiful place in Australia. I think we've got the best forests, the best waterfalls, the best mountains, best everything. I think, at least in such a small space, it
Sure.
takes 4 hours to drive from the top of Tasmania to the bottom.
Okay.
And I'll be talking for 7 hours if I keep going on about the amazing things Tasmania has. But if
Yeah.
you're coming down to Australia, hop on the ferry and come down to Tassie for sure.
Okay. I'd be into that. And honestly, like Australia, the thing that's been most interesting to me about Australia is actually just the people that I would be spending time with there.
That's
I've seen a lot of pictures about the outback and stuff. I'm like, I'm not
Outback
not
is it's
it's
the
just a
outback. It's
giant
just a
fucking
bunch of
desert.
yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm good. And I'm not trying, I don't live too luxe, but I'm not also interested in spending hours and hours or days walking around through the outback and getting attacked by some of the most poisonous shit in the world at any moment.
Yeah, that's the good thing about Tassie though, is most of the real dangerous shit is up on the mainland. Like they got the inland taipans and the brown snakes and all that sort of shit.
Right.
The main dangerous stuff we have down here are we've only got 3 species of snakes in Tasmania. The most dangerous is a tiger snake,
Okay.
which I think it's in the top 10 most venomous snakes. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But you rarely see them. We do have funnel web spiders as well, and redback spiders too. But as long as you're not a dickhead going and aggravating all the wildlife, like it's fine.
Yeah.
Like it's just animals. Just don't piss them off. They won't try and hurt you.
Sure. Don't be a dick. I
Yeah.
like it. That's I think that's solid, just like life advice. Don't be a dickhead.
Well, the most Australian saying I can think of is "Don't be a cunt."
Okay.
That's it.
That's fair.
Don't be a cunt, and you'll be fine with everything, with the people, with the animals. You'll be set.
Right. Perfect. All right. I appreciate you taking the time chatting with me. I think it's been a great conversation. And like I said, I would love to get down to Australia, do some teaching down there. I would love to see Tasmania. I don't know anything about Tasmania. It sounds like you're the perfect person to be a guide.
I can show you all the cool spots. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I really appreciate. Yeah, it's been enlightening to kind of like learn about your process and learn your backstory. You are doing really awesome work, and I love that you've positioned yourself that you can just keep pushing yourself every time, whatever you're doing, to do some really crazy, outlandish shit that is challenging, and you're teaching yourself new processes and technique, but it also is really helping your work to stand apart from what other people are doing. And I think you're
Exactly. Yeah.
consistently doing that, and it's awesome, and I love it. If you're not following Jason already on Instagram, again, it's Ellard Blacksmithing on Instagram. It's worth the follow. He does awesome stuff. So
Thank you very much, Matt.
absolutely,
I appreciate you inviting me on here as well. It's been a great chat.
absolutely. Well, and I appreciate you. You were in the calendar. What was it? 2 years ago?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't. I think it was 2 years ago.
Okay.
I think it
Yeah.
was the first one you did. I'm pretty sure.
Oh shit! Well, that was back in 2019. It's the first one I did.
First or second, one of the two.
Okay.
I
Anyway.
can't remember.
But I appreciate you being part of the calendar.
My pleasure, mate.
Yeah, it's been awesome. You're gonna hang out with me. We're gonna talk a little bit more, but we're gonna say bye to everybody. Thank you for hanging out and being here for the show and listening to the podcast. And if you're catching this on YouTube, thank you for taking the time to check it out. All the visuals we got here are very well worth going and checking out the video stream, and because Jason's work is stunning. So with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you, everybody.